Hello and welcome to the Responsive Family Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Hawley, holistic sleep coach, lactation consultant, peaceful parenting educator, and mom. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting sleep info, frustrated with sleep information that just plain felt wrong, or searched desperately for a truly gentle and responsive sleep approach, then you are in the right place. In each episode, we'll be answering your most pressing baby and toddler sleep questions, busting those sleep myths, and helping you understand truly developmental, biologically normal baby and toddler sleep, plus encouraging you to trust your intuition along the way. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. This week, we're going to be talking about a topic that I feel like a lot of parents struggle with, and a lot of parents who I work with have it as one of their goals, right? One of the things that they want to work on. And that is sleep predictability, right? How do we get a baby or a toddler to be more predictable in their daily pattern, in their sleep timings, in their nap rhythm, in their bedtime, in their morning wake up time, in their night wakes, a whole range of things that parents are struggling with the lack of predictability and wanting to work on more predictability. I mean, you can get it, right? Like, it makes a lot of sense. We have our whole routine. Everything is upended when we have a kiddo. And you know that when you're going to have a baby, that things are going to be different, that there'll be things out of your control in your daily patterns. But, the reality of it is usually different than we anticipate, right? Just because we can't totally wrap our brain around what it looks like to fit this new human into our daily lives. And of course, it looks really different baby to baby, but it also looks really different, newborn to 6-month-old to, 15-month-old to 3-year-old, right? So across time, that looks really different as well. And so it's this constant adjustment of what are their needs? What are my needs? What am I actually trying to do? What is childcare doing? What does our weekend look like? How do we actually have a life? How do we not totally mess up their naps? How do we have a social time with friends, with other, play dates, with all the things? So y'all know it. You're living it. I don't need to explain it to you, right? It can feel really overwhelming. It can feel like a lot of chaos. So predictability is an understandable goal. It also is a complicated goal because there are factors that we can control in working towards more predictability. And then there are factors that are completely out of our control. And it's hard how much of parenting is out of our control. And that, to a certain extent, is something that we have to accept, right? That there are things about our kiddo that are out of our control and we have to learn to work around or with or optimize, and that we can't change. And that is beautiful and hard. So, things that we cannot control about predictability, right? And the first is that all kiddos are not going to be the same level of predictable at any point in their life. And if we take a step back and think about this, all adults are not as predictable, right? We don't all have the same inherent rhythmicity to our bodies. And so it makes sense that babies and toddlers, like the young children, would not have that same level of pattern. And this is because there's an element of genetics and temperament here. Body rhythmicity is a temperament trait. And some people are just inherently really predictable, and some people inherently not. And most of us are somewhere in the middle. And so if you have one of these really inherently rhythmic, pattern-oriented, regular babies, these are the people who are like, oh gosh, we got on the schedule really easy, really early, it's so easy to predict their naps. They always go to bed at this time. They always wake up at this time. They always wake, once or twice a night at these times. And that can feel like something we all want to achieve, or like they found the magic formula when, often a large portion of that influence is their genetics here, right? That they are just inherently a more rhythmic baby. So we can't control the genetics and the temperament influence on how rhythmic a baby is with their sleep, with their eating, with any of the number of things that we want to have a little bit more control over. Another thing is age, right? Inherently, newborns are unpredictable. They are so immature, right? They're just born. They're just figuring things out. They don't have an established circadian rhythm. They don't know their days from night, right? And as they get older, babies tend to get more predictable, right? So your older baby is generally going to be more predictable than your newborn. Your toddler is generally going to be more predictable than your older baby, right? So we have a progression of predictability in sleep that happens with time. And like, we're not going to get a 3-week-old on a schedule. We're not going to necessarily get a 2-month-old on a schedule, right? We need to just accept that and know that generally speaking, babies over 6 months are more predictable than babies under 6 months. And that 3 to 6 month range is like a no man's land, right? Like some babies you see patterns, some babies you don't, but it's going to change quickly. So, right, age impacts predictability. Another big area is development, right? So even if you have a baby that's on a pattern that feels pretty predictable, they're going to go through phases and transitions of upheaval where that predictability goes out the window for a period of time. And that could be around big developmental milestones. So like learning to roll, learning to sit up, learning to crawl, learning to pull up and cruise, right? To stand, to walk. These big, rapid times of development tend to mess around with sleep. So you might see some sleep unpredictability there. But also when we think about like nap transitions, right? So as they are able to stay awake longer, they need less sleep. We see the naps kind of consolidate, drop down, right? Then in that nap transition, it's often quite messy. And we see a lot of fluidity with sleep times until they are sort of back on whatever that new schedule is, right? Whether it's going from 4 to 3 naps, 3 to 2, see it a lot in this time, 2 to 1, see it a lot in that time. And then sometimes dropping of the nap altogether can also bring some unpredictability, right? So we have age, we have temperament, genetics, and we have development and like transitions, all things that are outside of our control. Now, what can we control then? I said we could control some things, and I start with all the things that we can't control. What can we control? We can control our daily patterns. And daily patterns impact sleep, right? To a certain extent. And so, if we are not setting up a day that has enough rhythm that meets our baby's needs for sleep to support predictable sleep, then we're less likely to get it. Now, what I mean here, because we are not totally responsible for this, so don't take on too much here. But, if we have a child that is not able to nap out and about, right? They get too distracted, they get too amped up, and we're out and about all the time without setting aside a calmer time for nap, then we're not helping that kiddo have regular naps, right? If our evening is really unpredictable and we don't take the lead in like setting up a rhythm that this is our wind down time, this is our bedtime routine, this is the time that it's time for sleep, right? Then we're not going to have predictability there. If we don't create a rhythm where we have a regular morning wake up time, we're not as likely to have predictability there. Unless, of course, we have a kiddo who inherently does this in their body, right? So, there are things that we do that can help shape a more predictable sleep rhythm. And there are things that we do that are not wrong, right? But might be a mismatch with what our kiddo needs for more predictability. Because some babies can nap on the go, right? Some babies, it would be really easy to be out all day and you just, scoop them up, feed them to sleep, and they nap while you're doing whatever you're doing, or they nap in the car really well. And those babies would need something really different than the baby who can't nap out and about, just as an example, because there's a whole bunch of different ways that we influence, how these things happen based on what we're doing in our family and our days and how we're supporting sleep. So that's the big one, right? This is a big thing that we work on when we're working on more predictability. Another thing is our expectations. Like maybe I should have started here because it is sort of the underlying, like what are we even working towards when we say we'd like our kiddo sleep to be more predictable? Because every child is not going to have the same level of predictability. So if we're working towards really exact timings and we have a really unpredictable baby, you're almost setting yourself up for frustration and that they're never going to be predictable enough, right? As opposed to looking at rhythms, right? As opposed to having a better way you can think through your day based on some of the known ways your child tends to be unpredictable and irregular, right? So there's a bit of like, we can't get every kiddo up to the baby that wakes up at 6:30 every morning and is always napping, at 10 and 2:30 and goes to bed at, 8 on the dot. I don't actually know if those sleep times make sense. I was just pulling them out of my head. But we don't know. We can't get every kiddo to that level of exactness. And so a lot of times it's about thinking, how can we make this a predictability that feels more manageable and sustainable, but also is realistic for the ways your child's body tends to work. And so there's that level again of acceptance of the things that we can't control, that mindset piece that makes everything feel more manageable and more predictable once we're really seeing our child for who they are, rather than who we think they should be, or we want them to be, or be easier for us to be, or we feel pressured to have them be, right? Then we can really set ourselves up better. And that predictability, even if it won't be as predictable, will likely feel a lot more manageable, your daily patterns, and you'll know better how to handle them than if you're kind of fighting that lack of predictability. So it's a balance, right? It's a balance of working towards something more sustainable while accepting kind of where your kiddo is at and who they are. So I hope that gives you some things to think through when we're thinking about how do we get sleep more predictable, right? I'll just leave you with where I tend to look with my clients. It's really looking around sleep hygiene, looking around, their daily patterns, their rhythms, what things they do that sort of shape when their kiddo is sleeping and how they're sleeping, what their child's sleep needs actually are, and then really trying to bring all those together and try some things out, right? See what we can do to step in to provide that stability of the pattern, right? That actually makes sense for their child, because all kiddos are not the same, right? So the same factors aren't going to be as important across different kiddos. I would love to hear from you if you want to share a little bit about how you struggle or grapple or lean into the predictability or unpredictableness of your kiddo's sleep. So you can always send me a message on Instagram, reach out by email. I'd love to hear. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode left you feeling more informed, confident, and encouraged on your sleep journey. And just a reminder before you go that nothing in this episode is individualized to your specific sleep situation, nor is it to be taken as medical advice. Take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and check with your healthcare provider about any medical concerns. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll never miss an episode. And take a moment to rate, review, or share an episode you love on social media. All of that helps parents just like you find me, this podcast, and this gentle and responsive sleep information. I'll see you next time.